The morning sun cast long shadows across Black Hawk Air Base as Sergeant Ava Harris adjusted her flight suit one final time before stepping into the briefing room. 3 years of flight school, 2 years of simulator training, and countless hours studying A-10 Warthog manuals had led to this moment. Today marked her first official assignment with the 442nd Fighter Wing. The briefing room fell silent as she entered. 23 pairs of eyes tracked her movement to the only empty seat in the back row. She'd grown accustomed to the stares over the past month since her arrival, but they still made her skin crawl. "Gentlemen," Commander Rick Hawthorne's voice boomed from the front, his weathered face scanning the room, and "Lady." His pause before the last word felt deliberate, almost mocking. "Today we're running tactical air support exercises, real-world scenarios that'll separate the pilots from the pretenders." Hawthorne was a man who commanded respect through intimidation rather than inspiration. At 47, he carried himself, like someone who'd earned his stripes the hard way and expected everyone else to do the same, except he seemed convinced that some people simply couldn't. "Harris!" he called out, his steel-grey eyes finding her in the back. "You'll be observing today. Ground crew needs someone to log maintenance reports." A murmur rippled through the room. Ava felt her jaw clench, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd been grounded for observation for 3 weeks straight while every other pilot in her class had accumulated flight hours. "Sir, with respect," she said, standing slowly, "I've completed all required certifications. My simulator scores..." "Simulator scores don't mean jack when you're in a real cockpit with real lives on the line," Hawthorne cut her off. "This isn't flight school anymore, Harris. This is the real Air Force." The room was dead quiet now. Ava could feel heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain composed.
"I understand that, sir. That's exactly why I need actual flight experience to—" "What you need," Hawthorne interrupted again, his voice dropping to a deadly calm, "is to understand that flying an A-10 Warthog requires strength, instinct, and balls."
2 out of 3 isn't enough. A few snickers echoed from the front rows. Tyler Morrison, a cocky pilot fresh out of advanced training, turned in his seat with a smirk. "Maybe we could get you a nice transport job, Harris. Hauling supplies is important too." More laughter. Ava's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she remained standing, her spine straight as an arrow. She'd heard worse during her years, clawing her way through training, but it never got easier. "That's enough," Hawthorne said, though his tone suggested he'd enjoyed the exchange. "Morrison, you're leading today's formation. Harris, report to Maintenance Bay 3. As the room began to empty, Ava gathered her materials with methodical precision. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her rush out in embarrassment. As she moved toward the door, a quiet voice stopped her. "Harris." Captain Eleanor Rodriguez stood near the wall, her expression thoughtful. Rodriguez was one of the few female officers on base, though she flew cargo planes rather than fighters. "Walk with me." They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sound of jet
engines warming up echoed across the tarmac.
"You know," Rodriguez said quietly, "Hawthorne pulled the same crap with me when I first arrived. Different reasons, same result." "What did you do?" Ava asked. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, watching a formation of F-16s taxi toward the runway. "I waited, kept my head down, proved myself in other ways. But you..." She turned to look at Ava directly. "You're different. You're not trying to fit into a support role. You're going after their crown jewel, the A-10 program. Exactly. And that terrifies them." Rodriguez's voice dropped lower. "But here's what they don't know. I've seen your flight. Records from training, your instructor scores, your tactical assessments. They're not just good, Ava. They're exceptional." A spark of hope flickered in Ava's chest, quickly tempered by weeks of disappointment. "The question is," Rodriguez continued, "how long are you willing to wait for them to give you permission to prove what you already know?" As if summoned by her words, the roar of departing A-10s filled the air above them. Ava watched the aircraft climb into the morning sky, their distinctive twin engines and shark-tooth nose art clearly visible against the blue horizon. She thought about all the simulator hours, all the technical manuals she'd memorized, all the tactical scenarios she'd run in her head. She thought about the dreams that had carried her through every obstacle to get here. "I guess we'll find out," she said quietly. Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Something tells me we will." As Ava walked toward the maintenance bay, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was building toward something bigger than daily humiliations and grounded assignments. The question wasn't whether she belonged in that cockpit. She knew. She did. The question was what it would take to prove it to everyone else. Behind her, the last of the A-10s disappeared into the distance, leaving only the echo of their engines and the promise of a storm on the horizon. 2 weeks had passed since the briefing room incident, and Ava's situation had somehow gotten worse. What started as casual dismissal had evolved into something more systematic, more deliberate. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about Commander Hawthorne's personal prejudices. This was institutional. The flight schedule posted each Monday morning had become a weekly reminder of her status. While other pilots rotated through different aircraft and mission types, Ava's name appeared consistently in one column: ground support operations. It was military speak for everything except flying. She sat in the mess hall, picking at her lunch while reviewing technical manuals. Again. She'd read the A-10 operations handbook so many times she could probably recite it backwards, but it gave her something to focus on besides the conversations happening around her. "Heard she crashed 3 times in the simulator," Tyler Morrison was saying from 2 tables over, his voice just loud enough to carry. "That's why Hawthorne won't let her near a real bird." 3 times? Another pilot, Jake Henderson, replied with,
"Exaggerated surprise. Damn, maybe she should stick to video games." Ava's grip tightened on her fork. She hadn't crashed 3 times. She hadn't crashed at all. Her simulator record was flawless, a fact that was apparently inconvenient for
the narrative building around her. "I heard it was 5 times, chimed in Lisa Warren, one of the few other women in the program, though she flew reconnaissance drones rather than fighters, my friend in sim operations told me. The lies were spreading, mutating, becoming accepted. Truth through repetition. Ava had learned that fighting them directly only made things worse. It looked defensive, desperate. So she said nothing and let the fiction grow around her like weeds. But the whispers weren't the worst part. The worst part was the isolation. When she'd first arrived at Black Hawk, a few people had been cautiously friendly. Captain Jennifer Adams from Logistics had invited her to a barbecue. Lieutenant David Chen from Communications had included her in a group going to see a movie off base. Small gestures, but they'd meant everything. Now those invitations had dried up. People who'd once nodded in acknowledgement now looked past her. The few who still spoke to her did so with obvious discomfort, as if being seen with her might be contagious. "Mind if I sit?" Ava looked up to find Captain Rodriguez standing with a lunch tray, her expression neutral, but her eyes communicating something more complex. "It's a free country," Ava replied, though she couldn't keep the wariness out of her voice. Rodriguez sat down and began eating without comment. Around them, conversations continued, but Ava noticed how other people's eyes kept flicking toward their table. "You know what's funny?" Rodriguez said after a few minutes, her voice conversational. "I was reviewing last month's training reports yesterday. Interesting reading." "Oh?" Seems like someone's been logging an awful lot of solo simulator time. Hours and hours, actually. Way beyond the minimum requirements. Rodriguez took a sip of her coffee, almost like they were using the extra time to run advanced tactical scenarios. Ava's pulse quickened. She had been using her grounded time to run increasingly complex combat simulations, teaching herself maneuvers and strategies that weren't covered in basic training. She hadn't realized anyone was paying attention. The really interesting part, Rodriguez continued, is that those advanced scenarios? They're the same ones they use to train squadron leaders, and according to the logs, someone's been acing them. Their eyes met across the table. Rodriguez's expression was carefully neutral, but there was something else there. Respect, maybe.
Even admiration. Hypothetically speaking, Rodriguez said quietly, if someone were keeping detailed records of all their training activities, all their qualifications, all their scores,
that would be smart, because eventually someone important might want to see those records. Hypothetically, Ava agreed, and if that same someone happened to have documentation showing they'd exceeded every requirement, met every standard, and gone above and beyond in their preparation. Rodriguez paused meaningfully. Well, that would make it very difficult for anyone to claim they weren't qualified. Ava felt something shift inside her chest, not quite hope, but something close to it. Are you suggesting I should be keeping better records?
I'm suggesting, Rodriguez said, standing up and gathering her tray, that you should be ready for opportunities when they arise. Because they will arise, Ava. Maybe not when or how you expect, but they will. As Rodriguez walked away, Ava noticed
Tyler Morrison watching their interaction from across the room, his expression troubled. She'd seen that look before, the look of someone who was beginning to realize that maybe the situation wasn't as simple as they'd been told. That afternoon, Ava found herself in the base library, a small, underutilized space tucked between the commissary and the post office. She'd come looking for advanced tactical manuals, but she found something else instead. Buried in a stack of military regulations was a document that made her heart race: equal opportunity and treatment in military aviation programs. She'd read similar documents before, but this one was specific to her base, updated just 6 months ago. As she read, certain passages seemed to glow on the page. No qualified service member shall be denied flight opportunities based on gender, provided they meet all established performance criteria. Commanders are required to document specific, performance-based reasons for any extended grounding of certified pilots. Any pattern of discriminatory treatment must be reported through proper channels. Ava sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought about Rodriguez's advice about documentation. She thought about the growing pile of excellent simulator scores, the technical certifications she'd earned, the additional training she'd completed, and she thought about the complete absence of any formal documentation explaining why she'd been grounded for over a month. For the first time since arriving at Black Hawk Air Base, Sergeant Ava Harris began to smile. The storm was coming all right, but maybe she wouldn't be the one getting struck by lightning. The alarm pierced the pre-dawn silence like a knife, jolting Ava from restless sleep. Emergency klaxons meant one thing: real-world crisis. As she rushed to dress, her heart hammered with a mixture of adrenaline and desperate hope. Maybe, finally, they'd need every qualified pilot. The briefing room was chaos when she arrived. Pilots rushed in, pulling on flight suits, the massive display screen showing a satellite map painted in alarming shades of red and orange. Commander Hawthorne stood at the front, his usual composure replaced by grim urgency. "Listen up," he barked as the room settled. We have a Category 5 wildfire in the Cascade Range, approximately 40 miles northeast of our position. High winds pushed it over the firebreak at 0300 hours. It's moving fast and heading straight for the Pine Ridge Research Station. Ava's blood chilled. Pine Ridge housed a civilian research facility and a small military communications outpost, nearly 60 people total. The Forest Service is overwhelmed, Hawthorne continued. Local fire departments are evacuating civilians, but the research station is cut off. The roads blocked by fallen trees, and the helicopter evacuation was scrubbed due to smoke visibility. The room was dead silent. Every pilot knew what this meant. Air support mission, danger close to civilian populations, zero margin for error. We have one shot at this, Hawthorne said. Fire retardant drops to create a safe corridor for ground evacuation. I need every certified pilot on A-10s airborne in 30 minutes. Ava shot to her feet. Sir, I'm certified and ready. Negative, Harris. You're staying put. The words hit like a physical blow. Around her, pilots were already moving, grabbing gear, heading for the door. Real lives were at stake, and she was being benched. Sir, with respect, this is exactly what I've trained for. What you've trained for, Hawthorne snapped, is simulators and textbooks. This is the real world, Harris. People die when pilots make mistakes. My qualification scores.
Don't mean shit when the heat's on, his voice carried across the emptying room.
You think because you can push buttons in a computer game, you're ready to fly in zero visibility with civilian lives on the line? You're not ready, Harris. You may never be ready. The last few pilots filed out, leaving Ava standing alone with Hawthorne. She felt something break inside her chest, not just disappointment, but something deeper. This wasn't about qualifications or readiness. This was about who she was, and apparently that would never be enough. Sir, she said quietly, I've logged more simulator hours than anyone in my class. My technical scores are meaningless. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You want the truth, Harris? Fine, this isn't about your scores. This is about the fact that when everything goes to hell, I need pilots I can trust completely. Pilots who belong up there. And you, he shook his head, you don't belong in a cockpit. You never will. The room fell silent, except for the distant roar of engines starting up outside. Ava stood perfectly still, absorbing the impact of words that weren't just professional criticism. They were personal assassination. You can file a complaint if you want, Hawthorne added, his tone almost bored now. Good luck with that. Every pilot out there will back me up that you're not ready. Your own classmates think you're a liability. As if summoned by his words, Tyler. Morrison appeared in the doorway, fully suited up for flight. Commander, Tyler said, we're ready for final brief. He stopped, noticing Ava. Oh, hey, Harris, tough break. There was something in his tone. Not quite mockery, but not sympathy either. Resignation, maybe. As if this outcome had been inevitable. Morrison, Hawthorne said, make sure Harris understands she's to remain on base until we return. Ground. Support only. Copy that, sir. Tyler's eyes met Ava's for a moment. Maybe next time, right? After they left, Ava stood alone in the briefing room, surrounded by the detritus of preparation, discarded coffee cups, scattered papers, the lingering smell of nervous sweat and determination. Outside, she could hear the A-10s taxiing toward the runway. She walked to the window and watched as 6 warthogs lined up for takeoff. 6 chances to save 60 lives, 6 opportunities that should have been 7. The first pair lifted off, their twin engines roaring defiance at the grey morning sky. Then the second pair. Finally, the last 2 aircraft climbed away from the base, banking northeast toward the mountains where smoke already stained the horizon. Ava pressed her palm against the cool glass and made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to file a complaint. She wasn't going to argue with regulations or wait for someone else to give her permission. She was going to find another way, because somewhere in those mountains, 60 people were counting on the Air Force to save them, and the Air Force had just chosen to leave its most prepared pilot on the ground because she didn't belong in a cockpit. As she walked out of the briefing room, Ava's mind was already working. She thought about Captain Rodriguez's words about opportunities arising when you least expected them. She thought about all those extra simulator hours, all those advanced tactical scenarios she'd mastered. Most importantly, she thought about the fact that Hawthorne had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't a computer game. This was real life, with real consequences. And in real life, sometimes the person who didn't belong became the person who mattered most. The sound of jet engines faded into the distance, leaving only the steady wail of emergency sirens and the promise of a reckoning that was long overdue. The base felt eerily quiet, with 6 A-10s airborne, and most personnel focused on the emergency response. Ava walked the corridors with purpose, her mind racing through possibilities. She'd been grounded, dismissed, and humiliated, but she wasn't defeated. Not yet. Her first stop was the communications center, where she found Lieutenant David Chen monitoring radio traffic from the fire zone. David had been one of the few people who'd remained friendly despite the growing whisper campaign, though their interactions had become increasingly cautious. "Any word from the flight?" she asked, settling into a chair beside his workstation. David glanced around nervously before answering. "They're en route, but it's not looking good. Weather's deteriorating faster than forecast, visibility dropping fast." The radio crackled with tense voices. "Smoke's too thick, can't see the target, requesting weather update." "How long until they reach the drop zone?" Ava asked. 22 minutes at current speed, David replied. He hesitated, then added quietly, "Ava, I heard what happened in the briefing room." She tensed, expecting another lecture about chain of command or military protocol. "For what it's worth," he continued, "I pulled your training records last month. For the quarterly report." He kept his voice low. "Your scores aren't just good, they're the highest we've recorded in 3 years, including Hawthorne's." Ava's pulse quickened. "You have access to historical data?" "All training records, certification, dates, performance metrics." David's fingers moved across his keyboard. "Want to know something interesting? Every pilot currently airborne has lower combined scores than you do, every single one." The radio erupted with urgent chatter. "Visibility down to near zero.
May need to abort approach." "There's something else," David said, his voice barely audible. "I've been monitoring internal communications. There's been discussion about your status at the wing level. Someone's been asking questions about why a
top-scoring pilot has been grounded for weeks without documented cause."
"Who?" "I can't say, but Ava." He turned to face her directly. "Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than just Hawthorne's personal opinion. Someone higher up is paying attention." Before she could respond, Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway.
"Chen, I need current weather data for the fire zone," she said briskly. Then, noticing Ava, "Harris, walk with me." They moved into the corridor, Rodriguez setting a pace that suggested urgency. "How much do you know about emergency protocols?" Rodriguez asked, without preamble. "Standard procedures, why? What about deviation protocols, circumstances under which normal chain of command can be bypassed?" Ava's step faltered slightly. "Emergency. Situations where immediate action is required to prevent loss of life. But that would require proper authorization, yes. Unless..." Rodriguez stopped walking and faced her directly. Unless a qualified pilot witnesses an emergency situation that existing response cannot adequately address. The radio on Rodriguez's belt crackled. "Base, this is Viper Lead. Weather conditions worsening. May need to scrub the mission." Rodriguez keyed her radio. "Viper Lead, how much time before you reach minimum abort threshold?" 15 minutes, Base. Maybe less if visibility continues to degrade. Rodriguez clipped the radio back to her belt, her expression grim. 60 people, Ava. If those pilots can't complete the drop, we're looking at a potential catastrophe.
There has to be something. There is. Rodriguez's voice dropped to a whisper. Hangar 3, the reserve A-10. It's fueled and ready for emergency deployment.
Ava's heart stopped. You can't just steal an aircraft, no. But if you happen to discover that existing response was inadequate, and if you happened to have documentation showing you're the most qualified available pilot, and if you happen to believe that immediate action was necessary to prevent loss of life, Rodriguez shrugged. Well, that would be a different situation entirely. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. "Why?" Ava asked finally. "Why are you helping me?" Rodriguez's expression softened. "Slightly, because I've been where you are. Different circumstances, same system. I played by the rules, waited for permission that never came, and watched opportunities pass by. You know what I learned?" "What?" "Sometimes the system doesn't fix itself. Sometimes it needs to be shown a better way." Rodriguez checked her watch. "In about 10 minutes, I'm going to take a walk to review security procedures at the outer perimeter. Standard inspection, nothing unusual. It'll take me approximately 30 minutes to complete my rounds." The implication was clear. 30 minutes, when the senior officer responsible for base security would be conveniently absent. "Eleanor," Ava said quietly, using Rodriguez's first name for the first time, If this goes wrong, 60 people might die anyway, and you'll face disciplinary action." Rodriguez's smile was grim but determined. "But if it goes right, you'll have saved lives that nobody else could save. And maybe, just maybe, you'll have proven that some rules need to be broken." As Rodriguez walked away, Ava stood in the empty corridor, her mind spinning. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd dreamed of had led to this moment. Not the moment she'd imagined, not official recognition or proper assignment, but a chance to prove herself when it mattered most. She thought about the 60 people trapped in the mountains, about smoke and fire and time running out. She thought about 6 pilots struggling with impossible conditions and 1 more pilot who might be able to help. Most of all, she thought about Commander Hawthorne's words. "You don't belong in a cockpit. You never will." Maybe it was time to prove him wrong. Ava Harris walked toward Hangar 3 with steady, purposeful steps, knowing that the next 30 minutes would define not just her career, but her entire understanding of who she was and what she was capable of becoming. Hangar 3 stood at the far end of the flight line, separated from the main complex by several hundred yards of empty tarmac. As Ava approached, her hands steady despite her racing heart, she could see the distinctive silhouette of an A-10 Warthog through the partially open doors. The reserve aircraft sat in perfect readiness, fuel tanks topped off, weapons systems checked, emergency fire retardant pods loaded and waiting. It was standard protocol to maintain 1 fully prepared aircraft for immediate deployment, though that deployment was supposed to require direct authorization from the wing commander. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the crew chief responsible for hangar maintenance, looked up in surprise as Ava entered. Mike was a 20-year veteran who'd seen enough military bureaucracy to recognize unusual situations when they developed. Sergeant Harris? His voice carried a note of confusion. Thought you were grounded. Emergency deployment authorization just came through, Ava replied, her voice steady and professional. It wasn't exactly a lie. There was an emergency, and in
her mind, she was authorizing herself. I need this bird ready for immediate takeoff. Mike's weathered face showed uncertainty.
Ma'am, I haven't received any paperwork. Torres? Ava interrupted, moving closer and lowering her voice. 6 aircraft are currently struggling with zero visibility conditions trying to save 60 trapped civilians. Weather's deteriorating by the minute. Do you want to be the person who delayed backup support because of missing paperwork? The radio, clipped to Mike's belt, erupted with urgent transmissions. Base, visibility near zero. Can't acquire target. May need to abort. Mike's expression shifted as the reality of the situation hit him. He'd been at Black Hawk long enough to know what mission failure meant in circumstances like this. Aircraft's ready to fly, he said quietly. But Sergeant, this is your call. You understand what you're doing? I understand that people are going to die if someone doesn't act. Ava was already moving toward the aircraft, her pre-flight checklist running automatically in her mind.
Are you going to help me save them, or are you going to let protocol kill them? Mike was quiet for a moment, then nodded grimly. What do you need? 5 minutes to complete pre-flight, then clear me for taxi. After that, she paused, meeting
his eyes directly. You never saw me until I was already airborne. As Ava climbed into the cockpit, muscle memory took over. Thousands of hours in simulators had prepared her for this moment, but the reality was overwhelming. The weight of the aircraft around her, the complexity of real controls, the knowledge that this wasn't a training exercise. She ran through her checklist with methodical precision: hydraulics, electrical systems, engines, navigation, communications. Everything was perfect, as if the aircraft had been waiting for her. Base, this is Reserve Bird requesting immediate
takeoff clearance for emergency support mission, she transmitted, her voice calm and professional.
The response was immediate and confused. Reserve Bird, negative, no emergency deployment authorized. Base, Ava interrupted. I have visual confirmation that primary mission aircraft are unable to complete objective due to weather conditions. Civilian lives are at immediate risk, deploying under emergency authorization protocols. Before anyone could respond, she advanced the throttles and began taxiing toward the runway. Behind her, she could see Mike Torres standing in the hangar doorway, his expression unreadable. The radio exploded with chatter. Who authorized this takeoff? Ground control, stop that aircraft. Harris returned to hangar immediately, but Ava was already at the runway threshold, engines spooled to full power. She keyed her radio one final time. This is Sergeant Ava Harris in emergency support role. Primary mission aircraft are reporting mission abort due to visibility. I have advanced weather navigation training and specialized low visibility certification. 60 civilian lives are at risk. I'm going to save them. She released the brakes. The A-10 surged forward, its twin engines producing a distinctive roar. That seemed to shake the entire base. Within seconds, she was airborne, climbing steadily into the grey morning sky. Below, Black Hawk Air Base shrank to a collection of buildings and tiny runways. For the first time in her military career, Sergeant Ava Harris was flying a combat aircraft on a real mission. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she knew there would be no going back from this moment. Viper lead, this is emergency support, call sign. She paused, realizing she needed a call sign. Something came to her, unbidden but perfect. Call sign Phoenix. I'm en route to assist with fire suppression mission. The response from the lead pilot was immediate and heated. Phoenix, you are not authorized for this mission. Return to base immediately. Viper lead, Ava replied calmly. What's your current visibility status? A pause, then, reluctantly, near zero. We can't see the target area. Copy that. I have advanced navigation equipment and low visibility training. I can acquire the target and guide your formation in for effective drops. Another pause, longer this time. In the background, she could hear heated discussion among the other pilots. Finally, Phoenix, your orders are to return to base. This is not a request. Ava banked northeast toward the mountains, where a column of smoke now rose thousands of feet into the sky. Somewhere in that chaos, 60 people were running out of time. Viper lead, she said quietly. My orders are to save lives, same as yours. Phoenix is proceeding to target. As she flew toward the fire, Ava realized that everything in her life had been leading to this moment. Not the moment when someone would finally give her permission to fly, but the moment when she would take that permission for herself and use it to do what she'd always known she was meant to do. The radio chattered with increasingly frantic communications from Black Hawk Base, but Ava turned down the volume and focused on the mission ahead. Below, the landscape was transforming from green to brown to black as she approached the fire zone. It was time to prove that sometimes the person who doesn't belong becomes the person who saves everyone else. The smoke hit Ava's aircraft like a wall 20 miles out from the target area. Visibility dropped from clear sky to grey haze to an impenetrable brown-black cloud that seemed to swallow her A-10 whole. The GPS navigation system became her lifeline as the outside world disappeared. Viper lead, this is Phoenix, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. I'm entering the smoke column now, switching to instruments-only navigation. The response crackled through heavy static. Phoenix, you're flying blind into a firestorm. Abort immediately. Negative, Viper lead. I have the target coordinates and specialized low-visibility approach training. Stand by for guidance vectors. It wasn't entirely true. Her low-visibility training had been in simulators, not real-world conditions this extreme. But the principle was the same. Trust your instruments, fly the numbers, don't let your eyes lie to you when they can't see anything anyway. The turbulence hit without warning, slamming the aircraft sideways with such force that Ava's helmet struck the canopy. Superheated air rising from the massive fire below created updrafts and downdrafts that turned the sky into a washing machine. She fought the controls, her training taking over as she compensated for the chaotic air currents. Phoenix, we're showing you inside the danger zone, came Tyler Morrison's voice over the radio. There was something different in his tone now. Not the casual dismissal she'd grown accustomed to, but genuine concern. Your aircraft isn't showing on our scopes. Copy that, Viper 2. I'm in heavy smoke, approximately 2 miles from target area. Ava checked her instruments, calculating approach. Vectors while fighting to keep the aircraft stable. I have the research station on GPS, marking coordinates now. Through breaks in the smoke, she caught glimpses of the devastation below. The fire had consumed thousands of acres, leaving behind a moonscape of black earth and skeletal trees. Ahead, she could see the research station, a cluster of buildings on a ridge surrounded by a thin defensive line of sprinklers and fire retardant that wouldn't hold much longer.
Viper lead, I have visual on civilians, she reported. Approximately 60 people visible on the landing pad. They're waving emergency signals. The radio erupted with multiple voices. You can see them? How's visibility down there? Phoenix, what's your drop approach?
Ava studied the terrain below, her mind racing through tactical calculations. The standard approach would bring the formation in from the south, but smoke was heaviest there. The wind patterns suggested a northeastern approach would offer better visibility and more effective retardant placement. Viper lead, recommend approach from 045 degrees, altitude 800 feet AGL. I'll mark the target with smoke and guide you in.
Phoenix, came Viper Lead's voice. And now it carried a note of respect she'd never heard before. You're not carrying marking smoke. Ava smiled grimly. Negative on marking smoke, but I have another idea. Stand by. She dove toward the research
station, dropping to just above treetop level. The people on the landing pad grew larger as she approached. She could see their faces now, their expressions shifting from desperation to amazement as they realized help had arrived. Banking sharply around the complex, Ava released a controlled burst from her GAU-8 cannon into a safe area away from the buildings. The distinctive brah-tee sound of the Warthog's main gun echoed across the valley, and more importantly, the muzzle flash created a brilliant marker visible even through the smoke. Viper lead, target marked by cannon flash. Approach on my heading for retardant drop. Phoenix, that was... Tyler's voice trailed off. That was brilliant. One by one, the 6 A-10s followed Ava's guidance into the drop zone. Using her position as a reference point, she talked each pilot through the smoke-obscured approach, her calm voice cutting through the chaos of radio chatter and engine noise. Viper 3, adjust left 2 degrees. Viper 4, you're high. Drop to 750. Viper 6, perfect approach, cleared for drop. The retardant releases were spectacular, bright red clouds that seemed to push back against the fire itself. Each successful drop carved out more safe space around the research station, creating the defensive perimeter that ground evacuation crews needed. Phoenix, Viper lead called out. Ground control reports evacuation vehicles are through the fire line. All civilians are secure. A cheer went up over the radio frequency. 6 pilots celebrating a successful mission. But Ava felt something deeper than celebration. For the first time since arriving at Black Hawk Air Base, she felt like she belonged exactly where she was. Outstanding work, Phoenix. Tyler Morrison's voice came through clearly. We couldn't have done this without you. As the formation climbed away from the fire zone, Ava took one last look at the research station below. The buildings were safe, the people were safe, and the fire line was holding. Mission accomplished. But as the adrenaline began to fade, reality set in. She'd stolen an aircraft, defied direct orders, and violated chain of command in the most spectacular way possible. Commander Hawthorne would be waiting for her return, and he would not be pleased. Phoenix, Viper lead's voice cut into her thoughts. What's your plan for landing? It was a good question. She could try to slip back onto base quietly, though that seemed unlikely given the radio chatter that had been flying around during the mission. Or she could face the consequences head-on. Viper-led, she said finally. I'm going to land, park my aircraft and accept whatever comes next. Some things are worth the consequences. Copy that, Phoenix, for what it's worth. You saved 60 lives today. That should count for something. As Black Hawk Air Base appeared on the horizon, Ava could see that her return would be anything but quiet. Fire trucks, security vehicles, and what looked like half the base personnel were positioned along the flight line. At the center of it all, she could make out the unmistakable figure of Commander Hawthorne. This is Phoenix requesting permission. To land, she transmitted. The response was immediate and cold. Phoenix, you are cleared to land. Proceed directly to Hangar 1 and shut down engines. Do not leave your aircraft Copy that. Base. Phoenix. Inbound. As she lined up for her final approach, Ava reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd proven she could fly, proven she could lead, proven she could save lives when it mattered most. Whatever happened next, no one could take that away from her. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and Sergeant Ava Harris taxied toward her reckoning, knowing that she'd finally answered the question that had been haunting her since she'd first arrived at Black Hawk. She didn't just belong in a cockpit, she belonged in any cockpit, anytime lives were on the line. The crowd gathered around Hangar 1 was unlike anything Ava had ever seen at Black Hawk Air Base. As she shut down the engines and completed her post-flight checklist, she could see through the canopy that word of the mission had spread far beyond. The flight line, ground crew, administrative staff, maintenance personnel, and pilots from other squadrons had all found reasons to be present for her return. Commander Hawthorne stood front and center, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Beside him, Colonel Patricia Webb, the base commander, watched with an expression that was harder to read. Behind them, Captain Rodriguez maintained careful neutrality, though Ava caught a subtle nod of acknowledgement. As Ava climbed down from the aircraft, the crowd fell silent. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat, her hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline, but she walked toward the waiting officers with her head high and her stride steady. "Sergeant Harris," Hawthorne's voice cut across the hangar like a blade, "you are under arrest for theft of military property, disobeying direct orders, and unauthorized use of aircraft. You will surrender your flight gear immediately." Ava stopped
10 feet away and came to attention. "Sir, I respectfully request to make a statement regarding my actions. You'll have plenty of opportunity to make statements to the military police," Hawthorne snapped.
"Right now, you'll—" "Commander." Colonel Webb's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "I'll handle this." She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Ava. "Sergeant Harris, I understand you took it upon yourself to launch an unauthorized mission." "Yes, ma'am." "And that during this unauthorized mission you provided critical support that enabled the successful rescue of 60 civilians." "Ma'am, I provided navigation support to the primary mission aircraft when weather conditions prevented them from completing their objective." Webb nodded slowly. "I see. And what gave you the authority to make this decision?" It was the moment Ava had been preparing for during the entire flight back. She reached into her flight suit and pulled out a folded document, the regulation she'd found in the base library. "Ma'am, according to Air Force Regulation 11212, Section 3.4, any qualified pilot may take emergency action to prevent loss of civilian life when existing response capabilities are compromised by circumstances beyond command control." The hangar fell completely silent. Even Hawthorne seemed momentarily stunned. "Furthermore," Ava continued, her voice gaining strength, "my flight records show completion of all required certifications for A-10 operations, including advanced weather navigation and emergency response procedures. I was, by definition, a qualified pilot taking emergency action." Colonel Webb accepted the document and read it carefully. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, sensing that something significant was happening. "Commander Hawthorne," Webb said finally, "how long has Sergeant Harris been grounded?" 5 weeks, ma'am. She's not ready for—" "I didn't ask for your assessment of her readiness. I asked how long she's been grounded." Webb's tone was becoming sharper. "And I'd like to see the documentation supporting that grounding." Hawthorne's face flushed red. "Colonel, my assessment as squadron commander—" "Your assessment needs to be documented, Commander. Show me the paperwork that justifies keeping a fully certified pilot grounded for over a month." The silence stretched on as Hawthorne clearly struggled with the fact that no such documentation existed. His grounding of Ava had been based on personal opinion and prejudice, not military standards. "While you're looking for that paperwork," Webb continued, "perhaps you can explain why today's mission required 6 aircraft when the actual tactical situation called for exactly what Sergeant Harris provided: 1 pilot with advanced navigation, skills operating in conditions the primary formation couldn't handle." Tyler Morrison stepped forward from the crowd. "Ma'am, if I may?" Webb nodded. "Colonel Phoenix," Sergeant Harris, "saved our mission today. We couldn't see the target through the smoke. She guided all 6 aircraft to successful retardant drops. Without her—" He paused, glancing at his fellow pilots, who nodded in agreement. "Without her, we would have failed. Those people would have died." "That's irrelevant," Hawthorne interjected desperately. "She stole an aircraft. She disobeyed direct orders. She prevented a catastrophe," came a new voice from the crowd. "Captain David," Chen pushed forward, carrying a tablet. "Colonel, I have radio transcripts from the entire mission. At no point did the primary formation report they could complete the objective. Weather conditions exceeded safe operating parameters. Sergeant Harris provided the only solution that worked." Webb studied the faces around her: the ground crew, who'd watched Ava train endlessly, the pilots who'd witnessed her performance today, the support staff who'd seen months of unfair treatment. "Sergeant Harris," Webb said finally, "your actions today were unauthorized and violated chain of command. However, they also demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and skill we expect from our pilots." She turned to face Hawthorne. "Commander, I'm ordering a full review of personnel decisions in this squadron. Any pilot grounded for more than 2 weeks will require documented justification, reviewed by my office." Hawthorne's face went pale. "Ma'am, my authority as squadron commander—" "Your authority as squadron commander is to develop pilots, not suppress them." Webb's voice carried the finality of absolute command. "Sergeant Harris, you'll face disciplinary action for violation of protocol, but you'll also receive commendation for your performance during today's emergency, and effective immediately, you're restored to full flight status." A cheer went up from the crowd, not just from the pilots, but from the entire gathering of personnel who'd witnessed months of injustice finally being addressed. As the crowd began to disperse, Tyler Morrison approached Ava directly. "Harris," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "Hell, we all do." "No," Ava replied, surprising him. "You don't owe me anything. We're all just doing our jobs." "But the things we said, the way we treated you, made me work harder, train longer, and prepare better." She smiled genuinely for the first time in months. Today, when it mattered most, all that extra preparation saved 60 lives. "So thank you." As Tyler walked away, shaking his head in amazement, Captain Rodriguez appeared at Ava's side. "How does it feel?" Rodriguez asked. "How does what feel?" "Finally proving you belong here." Ava looked around the hangar, at the A-10 she'd just flown, at the pilots who'd fought beside her, at the base that had tried to break her, but had instead forged her into something stronger. "I never had to prove I belonged here," she said quietly. "I just had to prove it to myself." 6 months later, the morning briefing room at Black Hawk Air Base had a completely different feel. Where once there had been an atmosphere of exclusion and hostility, now there was professional respect and genuine camaraderie. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been thorough. Ava stood at the front of the room, leading the tactical briefing for the day's training exercises. Her new rank insignia, Staff Sergeant, caught the light as she gestured toward the mission map. "Today's scenario involves close air support for ground units in mountainous terrain," she explained to the assembled pilots. "Weather conditions will be marginal, visibility limited. We'll be practicing the advanced navigation techniques that proved effective during the Pine Ridge rescue. The Pine Ridge rescue had become legendary on base, not just for its successful outcome, but for what it had represented. The official after-action report had praised the innovative leadership and tactical excellence displayed during the mission, though it had diplomatically avoided mentioning that the innovative leadership had come from a pilot who'd been grounded for supposedly lacking those exact qualities. Tyler Morrison raised his hand. "Sergeant Harris, are we practicing the cannon flash marking technique you developed?" "We are," Ava replied with a smile. "Though I prefer to call it adaptive resource utilization in my official reports." Laughter rippled through the room. The relationship between Ava and her fellow pilots had evolved into something she'd never expected. Genuine, mutual respect. Tyler, in particular, had become one of her strongest supporters, often seeking her advice on complex tactical situations. "Questions about today's mission?" she asked. Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, a new pilot who'd arrived 3 months ago, raised her hand. "Sergeant, what's the most important thing to remember when flying in low-visibility conditions?" "Trust your training, trust your instruments, and trust your instincts," Ava replied. "But most importantly, remember that you're never flying alone. Your wingmen are always there, and sometimes the best leadership means knowing when to follow someone else's guidance." As the briefing concluded and pilots began filing out for pre-flight preparations, Captain Rodriguez approached. "How's the new assignment treating you?" Rodriguez asked. Ava's promotion had come with new responsibilities. In addition to her regular flying duties, she'd been assigned to develop and implement new training protocols for advanced weather operations. It was work that drew on everything she'd learned during her months of enforced ground study, turning her period of exclusion into expertise that now benefited the entire wing. "It's challenging," Ava admitted, "but good challenging. I'm working on a simulator program that replicates the exact conditions we faced at Pine Ridge. If we can train pilots to handle those situations routinely, we'll be ready for anything."
"And Commander Hawthorne?" The question was carefully neutral, but Ava understood the subtext. Hawthorne had been reassigned to a staff position following the squadron review ordered by Colonel Webb. His replacement, Major Rebecca Torres, had proven
to be exactly the kind of leader Ava had always hoped to serve under, demanding but fair, focused on developing talent rather than suppressing it. "Ancient history," Ava said simply. Rodriguez smiled. "I heard you got some interesting news yesterday." Ava's expression grew more serious. "Test pilot school. They offered me a slot in the next class." "And?" "I'm thinking about it." Ava looked out through the briefing room windows toward the flight line, where A-10s were being prepared for the day's missions. "It would mean leaving here, leaving all this behind." "This will always be here," Rodriguez said gently. "But opportunities like test pilot school, those don't come around twice." Before Ava could respond, Lieutenant Walsh appeared in the doorway. "Sergeant Harris?" "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. Says he's from the Pentagon." Ava exchanged glances with Rodriguez, then followed Walsh outside. A black sedan was parked near the headquarters building, and beside it stood a man in Air Force dress blues with more ribbons on his chest than Ava had ever seen in person. "Sergeant Harris, I'm Colonel Marcus Williams from Air Force Personnel. Command." His handshake was firm, his manner serious but not unfriendly. "I understand you've been offered a test pilot slot." "Yes, sir. I'm here to discuss a different opportunity. Walk with me." They moved away from the building, toward the flight line, where the morning's activities were beginning. "What do you know about the A-10 replacement program?" Williams asked. "I know they've been talking about retiring the Warthog for years, sir, and I know they haven't found anything that can do the job as well." Williams smiled. "Exactly. Which is why we're not retiring them. We're upgrading them. New avionics, new weapons systems, new everything except the basic airframe. It's going to require pilots who understand both the old platform and the new technology. Ava felt her pulse quicken. What are you saying, sir? I'm saying that we need someone to help develop the training program for the upgraded A-10. Someone who knows the aircraft inside and out, who's proven they can innovate under pressure, and who has a gift for teaching others. Williams stopped, walking, and faced her directly. Test pilot school would give you advanced technical training. This assignment would let you use that training to ensure that the A-10 continues to save lives for another generation. The offer was everything Ava had never dared to dream of, a chance to help shape the future of the aircraft she'd come to love, to ensure that other pilots would have the opportunities she'd had to fight for. "I'd be honored, sir," she said, without hesitation. Williams nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll start test pilot school in 6 months, then report to the A-10 modernization program upon graduation." "Congratulations, Sergeant Harris. You've earned this." As the colonel walked back toward his sedan, Ava stood alone on the flight line, watching A-10's taxi toward the runway for the morning's training mission. She thought about the journey that
had brought her here. The rejection, the isolation, the moment when everything had changed because she'd decided to take action rather than wait for permission. Captain Rodriguez appeared beside her. So it looks like I'm going to test."
"Pilot school after all," Ava said, unable to keep the grin off her face. And then I'm coming back to make sure every pilot who flies an A-10 has the training they need to save lives when it matters most." Above them, the distinctive sound of Warthog engines filled the morning air as the formation climbed toward the mountains. Ava watched until they disappeared into the blue sky, knowing that somewhere in that formation were pilots who would face their own moments of truth, their own opportunities to prove that they belonged in the cockpit. Thanks to everything she'd learned about flying, about leadership, about standing up for what was right, they'd be ready. "You know what the best part is?" Rodriguez asked. "What?" "Next time someone tries to tell a qualified pilot they don't belong in a cockpit, there's going to be a staff sergeant somewhere who knows exactly what to do about it." Ava smiled, thinking about Lieutenant Walsh and the other new pilots arriving at Black Hawk every month. They'd face their own challenges, their own prejudices to overcome. But they'd also have something she hadn't had when she'd first arrived. An example of what was possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations on your dreams. The sound of jet engines faded into the distance, leaving only the promise of blue skies and unlimited horizons. Somewhere in those skies, the next generation of pilots was learning to fly, learning to fight, and learning that sometimes the person who doesn't fit the mold becomes the person who breaks it open for everyone else. Staff Sergeant Ava Harris walked toward her own aircraft, ready for another day of proving that the sky belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.